Hello everyone, it's Parisha from The Artistic Scroll, and in today's Procreate tutorial, we're creating a magical autumn wreath filled with beautiful details. We'll be layering and shaping each element from the delicate twigs that form the wreath base to the rich autumn leaves, vibrant berries, and textured pine cones. We'll also learn how to bring out the soft glow of the pumpkins nestled in the wreath, adding depth and warmth to the whole design. And finally, we'll sprinkle in a touch of magical dust and gentle fireflies, tying it all together with an enchanting, whimsical feel. Since this is a longer, in-depth tutorial, feel free to take breaks and follow along at your own pace. You'll need your iPad, Apple Pencil, and the Procreate app. Don't forget to download the free sketch file and color palette from the Artistic Archive. They're ready and waiting to help you get started. So once you're ready to create this cozy magical wreath, let's jump right in and bring this autumn scene to life. Welcome guys, so this is what your canvas will look like once you download it from the Artistic Archive. And as you can see, we've already got the sketch here on layer 1. And we just need to go ahead and select the Autumn Wreath color palette that you've also downloaded from the Artistic Archive. Set that as default and then move the color palette to the left. And then we can go ahead and just rename our layer 1, the sketch layer, as sketch. And once that's done, just change the blend mode to multiply and reduce the opacity down to just where you can barely see it, enough for us to be able to see and work with it. So we're creating a new layer by tapping on the plus sign, and then we're just going to move this new layer below the sketch layer. So we're going to be starting off with the leaves and all of these pretty objects on this autumn wreath in layer by layer as such. These big maple leaves are all going to be orange, so they will also be in 2 different layers. So let's start with the top layer first. We're going to go ahead and select the technical pen brush in inking in the brush library. And for these orange maple leaves, we're going to select this orange color. So let's go ahead and start painting in the top layer of these orange leaves. And then we're just going to go ahead and fill this in. Yeah. Alright, so the next one is also going to be this leaf. It's also in the top layer. Alright, and we're just going to erase this a little bit here so that it doesn't fall onto this second maple leaf, because this maple leaf is going to be in the layer below, so that'll be the lower maple leaf layer. So we're going to be working on the one right next to the pumpkin in the top layer. The reason why we're differentiating these 2 layers is mainly because it'll help us to add our shadows and highlights in an easier way than it would if we were trying to do it all in one layer. So we're just trying to take advantage of what digital art allows us to, really. If you were doing this in traditional art, you would probably use masking tape or something like that. Okay. And then we have this particular leaf here as well on the upper side of the pumpkins. Alright, the leaf next to it will be in the layer below, so we're not going to work on that, but we're going to work on this middle leaf here. Alright, so we've got all of our top leaves here. That looks nice. Now we can go ahead and paint in the lower ones. So create a new layer by tapping on the plus sign. Move this new layer below the top orange leaves layer. And then let's paint in the remaining ones. Alright, so we've got all of our maple leaves here. That looks great. So we're going to be working on these slim brown leaves now. So let's create a new layer, move it below this second orange leaves layer. We're going to select this brown color right next to the orange on the right side, and then let's go ahead and start painting in the leaves. We just need to paint in the leaves in this one, not the stem, because that will be a layer above it. Then you can just fill them all in once you've made the shape. I'm just going to go back to my orange leaf layer here. Yeah, and I'm just going to go ahead and erase this little section so that it looks like it's overlapping a bit. Can we do it like that? You can make some tiny adjustments if you want to see which ones are overlapping and which ones are not. I think that looks fine. Okay, returning to our brown color again. And then I'm just going to go back to the orange leaf layer and then just erase. Well, I'm going to select the technical pen brush as the eraser first because it's got sharper edges as an eraser. And I'm just going to go ahead and erase this leaf pattern out because we're trying to emulate overlapping, like I mentioned. Just have this cover up this edge. Yeah, I think that looks nice. Alright, let's continue with the brown leaves. Still got the brown color selected. And then we've got these 2 leaves here. Okay, so all of our leaves are done. We're going to create a layer above this one now. And then we're going to select this dark brown color in the front, the first row, the one right to the right. Right to the right. You know what I mean. Okay, so we're going to be making the stems now. So let me see. I'm going to have a brush size of around 7% for the technical pen brush. And then you can just go ahead and paint in these stems. Right, so we've got all of our stems ready now. It's time to paint in these yellow leaves, the smaller ones that we've got. So we're going to create a new layer and move it below the brown leaves layer. And select this yellow color in the first row. And let's go ahead and paint in the yellow leaves. So similarly, we're just going to go ahead and erase parts which were overlapping, so we don't want this orange stem to be on top, so we've erased that. And let's see, where else have we got yellow leaves? Right here. Okay, so we've got all of our yellow leaves here as well. Next we're going to be painting in our pumpkins. So we'll create a layer right above the orange leaves now. So new layer above that. And for our pumpkins we're going to use the cream color as the base. And let's go ahead and paint in these now. Alright, so our pumpkins are ready. I think I just want to erase this, it's a bit too rounded. Yeah, I think that'll do. Now we just need to paint in the stems, so that we're going to do on a different layer. So create a new layer, and then we're going to select the green color next to the white, well, the cream color. And then just go ahead and paint in. Alright, so these are done. They look great. Next we're going to be working on the pine cones, so let's start that. Alright, so we're going to create a new layer on top, and then we're going to select the darker brown color in the second row, right next to the green. And let's go ahead and paint in the pine cone. So we're just painting in the entire base right now, and later on when we're working on the pine cones themselves, we'll be adding in all the details. So just make sure that you're keeping in mind what object is supposed to be on top. So for example, as you can see, the leaf is supposed to be on top here, so we have to work around it. Alright, so you've created all of these pine cones, that's great. Next we'll be working on the acorns, so let's go ahead and work on that. So we're going to be creating a new layer below the pine cones layer. And let's start off with the bases for the acorns. And that'll be this rich brown color that we have, this reddish brown color in the fourth row. Okay, so by the bases I just meant that we'll be creating these. Now as you can see, these leaves are overlapping. So let's make sure that they are on top here. Okay, so we've got all of our acorn bases ready now. Now we need to paint in their tops. So let's create a new layer above the acorn bases layer. And then we'll select this, what color would you call this? Dark beige? I don't know. So we'll choose this color and then we'll go ahead and start painting the tops. Alright, so we've painted all of our acorn tops as well. That looks great. Next we're going to be, hold on, I just want to check something here. Yeah, I kind of want to have this leaf on top. Give me one moment, guys. Alright, I think that looks great. Okay, so next we're going to be working on the yellow berries. These will be the bigger ones right in this section to the left and this one here to the right. All the smaller ones will be red. We'll be working on them a little later. But let's create the yellow berries first. So we're going to create a new layer above the acorn tops layer. And then for the berries, we've got this third row in the color palette. We're going to select the yellow color from there. It's a little bit of a desaturated yellow than the one that we've got on the top, in the top row. Yeah, so I just wanted to use kind of like the same colors, but a difference in their saturations and brightness, just so that it can bring about a more dynamic look without bringing in too many colors into the picture. So that's one trick that you can also use in your own illustrations, that you can try and employ different saturations of the same hue, and that kind of like helps a lot. Okay, so we've got all of our yellow berries as well. Next we're going to be painting in let's say the red berries then. So we're going to create a new layer below the yellow berries layer and select the red color in the third row. So let's go ahead and start these. Alright, so we've got all of our red berries here as well. That looks great. So next we're going to be painting in the berry stems, and for that we need to create a layer below the pine cones layer. So let's go ahead and locate that. So these are our pine cones layer. We're going to be creating a new layer above the yellow berries layer, which is the same as below the pine cones. And then we're going to go ahead and select the same dark brown color that we used for our brown leaves stems layer. This will be the brown color in the first row at the end. Now let's go ahead and just paint in these stems. Now the way that I would do this, because it's all supposed to be like one thick stem here, let's go ahead and just paint one curve first, and then we can go ahead and start erasing, because otherwise it's going to look a little disjointed and the effect won't be that nice. I think it looks nicer this way. One more thing to notice is that the stems would be thicker near the base where they attach to the main stem, and thinner near the top where they attach to the berry. So when you're trying to make your stems, the individual ones, just see if you can also maintain that. Okay, so we've got all of our berries and their stems ready now. And the last thing that's left as a flat color is to add in the twigs. So let's go ahead and create that now. We're going to make a new layer right at the bottom here, just above the background color section. And then for our twigs, we're going to select the second brown color in the first row. And we're just going to be painting in the outline entirely, and then we'll fill it in. Okay, so once the outer outline is complete, let's make the inner one. Now the inner outline has a few gaps here. It's just to bring about some more interesting variation in our wreath to make it a bit more realistic. So it's just to have these gaps here as individual twigs just peeping out of the wreath itself. So just make sure that you are closing your shape as you're going, because that is what is actually needed. And once you're done, fill it in. There you go, you've just made all of the flat colors, and I think that looks amazing. Let me just figure out where I've got this little dot from. There you go. Alright, so we've got all of our flat colors in, and now we're ready to start working on the individual leaves. So let's get started with the orange leaves first. We're going to be working on both of these layers simultaneously, so let's go ahead and create a clipping mask to each of them. And then we will go ahead and select the soft airbrush in airbrushing. And for this section, we're going to use the red color in the third row. And we are going to now paint in a little bit of a gradient, because right now it's just bright orange and we want some more color variation to our leaves here. So let's just paint in some of this red color here along the central veins. So I've got a brush size of around 25-26%. That's really all that you need. We don't need to go too far, like cover everything, that's just too much. So just be very light with your brush stroke and just paint in some gradient in the centers. And you don't even need to go all the way to the top. Just about that much. And once you're done with that, let's go ahead and just blur things up a bit. So I would go ahead and apply a Gaussian blur of around 6 to 7%. I think that looks nice, just so that it's gently melted in. Now we're going to repeat the same step on the lower orange leaves section too. So paint in the gradient first. Okay, and then we're going to apply the Gaussian blur. Again, the same 7%. And that looks nice. Alright, so I think I might just go ahead and blur this up a little bit more. Blend this, I mean. A bit too dark for me here. Alright, so we are done with adding in some of this gradient, and that looks nice. Now we're going to add a bit more of a texture. So let's create a new clipping mask, and then change the blend mode of that to multiply. I'm going to repeat the same one for the lower layer as well. New clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply. Now returning to the top layer. Now for the first layer of texture, we're going to go ahead and select spray paints in the brush library and the flicks brush here. Now we can go back to our orange color this time. And then with the flicks brush, I've got a size of around 4%. Just go ahead and gently flick your brush here. And as you can see, you've got a nice speckled kind of texture. Just what we want. Now, don't be too, you can be a bit firmer with the pressure here, but I would suggest just be light so that you can modulate the size of the brush, because as you can see, the more pressure you put in, the thicker the dots will be. I just want them to be a bit fine, so I'm not going to be applying a lot of pressure here. Okay, so we've got something like this. Now what we can do is just reduce the opacity slightly down to, I'd say, around 90%. And we are going to repeat this step for the lower orange leaves as well. You can obviously just increase your brush size as well if you want bigger dots. but I think this looks nice and fine. Alright, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of this one down to 90% as well. So next we're going to create one more clipping mask. Well, don't worry, this is one of the first ones for many of them. Alright, if you've done any of my tutorials before, you'd know we thrive on clipping masks. Okay, so we're going to create one more clipping mask, and then this time we're going to change the blend mode to linear burn instead of multiply. So let's repeat this step for the lower leaves as well. Create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to linear burn. Returning to the top layer, and this time in spray paints we'll select the splatter brush. Right, so let's go ahead and just add in some bigger splatters. So I've got a brush size of around 5% here. Now you can be very random with your splatters here. You can even increase the brush size a bit if you want. Just remember, you can always just change the position of the canvas as well, rotate it a bit if you want. And then you can always erase some of them. Like, I think this is a bit extra, don't need all of those. That's fine. So just splatter some texture around. Okay, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 75%. Let's repeat the same step for the lower layers as well, the lower leaves layer. Alright, so those are done. I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to 75% as well. And now I want a little bit more of a gradient. So let's go ahead and create one more clipping mask on both of these layers. And we're going to select this yellow color in the first row. Go back to the soft airbrush, and just along the tips, going to be painting in some yellow color. Because I think just orange is a bit boring. Let's bring in some more color. You can see why having these on two separate layers, the orange leaves, is kind of advantageous to us now. Right, once that's done, we're going to just apply a slight blur, I'd say about 7%. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity of this down to around 80%. So that it's not bright yellow, because we've got these yellow berries and leaves around it as well. So we want those to be visible against this. The yellow as bright as it was before. would have impeded our vision a bit, so we're just going to reduce the opacity. So let's repeat the same step for the lower leaves as well. Paint in our yellow texture, gradient. So as you can see, they're almost the same color, aren't they? So it'll do us some good to reduce the opacity of this slightly. Okay, blur it up 7% and then reduce the opacity down to 80%. Alright, so our leaves are looking beautiful. Next, we're going to be adding in the veins that we've got here. So to add those, let's create a clipping masks again. And this time we're going to change the blend modes to multiply. So new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply. And we're going to go back to our technical pen brush in inking. And let's go ahead and select the red color now. Okay, I've got a brush size of around 6%. And we can just paint in the veins. Okay, so once you've got the central veins already in place, what I'm going to suggest now is to make some smaller ones. For each section of the leaves here, as you can see, there are some curves and pointy edges, so we want all of these to be contributed to by a vein. Okay, looks pretty. Just make sure that they are all connected to the central vein. Alright, so that's done. I'm just going to repeat this step for the lower one as well. Okay, so once you've got all of these ready, we're going to go ahead and do a few tricks here now. We're going to duplicate the vein layer, all right? And then we're going to reduce the upper of the duplicated layers to its opacity down to 33% or so, all right? And then we are going to apply a Gaussian blur to our lower duplicated layer. So select that, go to Gaussian blur, and then we're going to go ahead and apply Gaussian blur. You can see that this really brings out a nice effect here, blends in our veins a bit, but also keeps them sharp enough to give us a nice effect. So I would say go somewhere around 4%. Yeah, 4% is nice enough. Looks pretty. We're going to do the same thing for our top layer as well. So duplicate the veins layer for the top orange leaves layer, and then we're going to reduce the opacity of the top layer to 33%, and then select the lower duplicated layer, go to Gaussian blur, and apply a blur of around 4%. Pretty. Alright, so we just need to add a bit more of a gradient down here in the center where we painted our initial red gradient. So to do that, let's go ahead and create a new clipping mask on top of each of these, and then go back to a blend mode of multiply. Do the same for the lower layer as well. Multiply. I've gone back to the top layer and selected the soft airbrush. Now we're going to be painting in some more red color here in the center. Actually, let's go ahead and select this acorn brown color. All right, so this is the acorn base color that we had. That gives us a nice darker texture. So let's see how that looks. So we've got this, and we can go ahead and apply some red to the centers of all of these, just where we had placed our red gradients earlier. Okay, that looks good. I'm just going to go now and apply some Gaussian blur to this. I'd say, again, about an 8%, and then reduce the opacity down to 80%. Now you've got a nice variation of color here as well, and there's some dark leaves in there as well in the center. I like it. I'm just going to blend this in slightly because I think this was a bit too dark. Yeah, all right. So let's repeat this step for the lower leaves as well. And then apply a Gaussian blur again, about 8%, and reduce the opacity down to 80%. And that looks great. You can blend them in slightly if you want, if it's a bit too dark. But yeah, I think that looks nice. All right, so next we're going to be going ahead and applying some shadows to these. Now there are lots of objects which are overlapping the leaves, as you can see. So we're going to be going ahead and applying those first. So let's do that. We're going to create new clipping masks, and then changing the blend modes to multiply. Right, and we will go ahead and select, we still got the soft airbrush. I think that should be fine. No, actually, let's go and select our technical pen brush because we want the shadows to be a bit sharper, but just blurred enough to be considered a shadow. All right, so we're going to select this lighter brown color in the second row, the last color there. And then we're going to be painting in the shadows. So as you can see, we've got various objects here on the leaves. So we want to be painting in their shadows. So let's do that. Now, if you try and maintain some distance between the object and the shadow, like here as you can see, it'll look much nicer, more natural than it being right next to the object as it is here. So as you can see, like this leaf is a bit away from the shadow, so it gives the effect that the leaf is at a distance from the object below it. So I like that. So try and do that for most of your objects as needed, of course. If it doesn't qualify, there's no need to add it there. And I would give the pumpkin ones a bigger shadow. So we're imagining that the light source is coming from somewhere around there, so all of our shadows are falling towards the lower surface. So there's not going to be much of a shadow on these, so that's fine. So once you've made sure that all of your objects have had some shadows there, the next thing that I would just do is go back to the soft air brush, and then we're just going to go ahead and apply a little bit of a shadow towards the edges of some of the leaves here. Not some of the leaves, I mean some of the edges here, as you can see. That's just going to bring about some more definition to the leaves. Okay, I'm just going to turn off our sketch layer now so you can see it a bit better. And now we're going to just apply some Gaussian blur to this, just enough so that you can actually see the shadows, that they don't blend in too much. So I would say around 2%. And then you can go ahead and just blend in some of this extra brown shadow a little bit more individually. Alright, so we've done that. I think that looks good. We're going to repeat the same step for the lower leaves as well. So let's go back to the lower leaf section and then add in our shadows. Going back to the technical pen brush to add in shadows from the objects first. And this time remember, the overlapping orange leaves will also leave shadows, so you can paint those in too. Alright, so these are done, and then I'm just going to go back to the soft airbrush and then paint in the edge shadows. Right, so that's done. Let's go ahead and apply Gaussian blur again. And have a look. Yep, 2%, that works. And then we're going to go ahead and reduce the opacity down to 80%. Yeah, did I reduce the opacity there? No. Yeah, so we're going to go back to our top shadow layer that we had made and also reduce the opacity down to 80%, because as you can see, that looks much more natural than a really stark dark shadow as such. So I'm just going back to our the lower layer, and I'm just blending in these edge shadows. Okay, so for the last step of our orange leaves, we are going to add some highlights. So let's go ahead and do that. We're creating a new clipping mask for both of these layers and then changing the blend mode to screen. And let's do the same for the top one as well. Alright, now we're going to be using the same acorn brown color that we had here, the brown base color for the acorns. And then we're going to be painting in some highlights just around the tops. So I would increase our brush size a bit. Not too much, just a bit. It really brightens up the leaves as well. So that's the whole aim behind it. But even with the shadows that we've added in, we get some spark back for our leaves. Okay, and then we're going to slightly reduce the opacity of this down to 70%. That looks great. Let's go ahead and work on the lower leaves now. So add in some highlights just around the edges. and then reduce the opacity to 70%. And there you go, our orange leaves layers are done. I think that looks pretty. I'm just going to go ahead and blend this shadow in slightly. A bit too dark for me and unblended. Yeah, I think that looks nice. All right, so let's go ahead and group these together because we've got so many layers and clipping masks there. So we're grouping our top layer together, and we can just name these as upper orange leaves, or whatever you want to call it. Upper orange leaves just defines everything for me. And then we're going to group our lower leaves together as well, and then we're going to just rename that as, there we go, lower orange leaves. Brilliant, so we are done with our orange leaf section. Lovely. So next we're going to be working on our brown leaves. So let's get started with the brown leaves then. It's essentially the same concept as the orange leaves, where we're going to add some gradient first and then some textures, then with the veins, shadows and highlights. It's the same concept. So we're going to do that. I'm turning back our sketch layer on, and we can select our brown leaves layer, create a new clipping mask for that, and then we've got our soft airbrush. We're going to select the red color again, and we are going to go ahead and apply a little bit of a gradient. I'm going to reduce my brush size down to around 16%. Yeah. So just around near the base and towards the center. I'm going to reduce it even further, actually, like about 12%, the brush size. And then we're just going to apply a red gradient in the center. We don't need to go too far near the tip. Probably just till where we've got the stems. The veins, I mean. Okay, and then some here. Alright, so once that's done, we are then going to apply a Gaussian blur to blur it all up, and I would say again just about 7%. 7 is a nice lucky number for us in this. Almost everything is 7% blurred. So any places where you feel like it's been blurred too much, go ahead and add some more color, blend it out, blend it in. I think we can do a bit more of red here. Alright, so once we've got all of our gradients in, the next thing that we're going to be working is on our textures. So create a new clipping mask. And then this time we're going to change the blend mode to overlay. And for our texture for this one, we're going to go to charcoals and select the 6B compressed brush. Right, so once that's done, we will select the yellow color in our leaves section. Now I've got a brush size of around 15%, and that should do. I'm just going to apply some light, that's too much, light flicks like that for a color, for our texture I mean. And we're going to reduce the opacity down to around 30%, and then go ahead and apply some of this. I think it'll look nicer if we know what opacity we're going for, because we don't want it to be too dark, but just enough that there is a base texture. We'll be adding in some more texture to this with a different brush in the next step. And as you can see here, it's like nicely speckled but a different kind of texture from the orange leaves. Okay, so we've got all of our leaves with this texture now, and I think that looks nice. For our next one, we are going to be going ahead and selecting the Flicks brush again. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then go back to spray paints, select the Flicks brush. And then we're going to go back to our base color for the leaf brown, select this one, and we're just going to go ahead and flick some texture onto these leaves. And again, my brush size is just about 4%. Okay, and then we're going to reduce the opacity down to 75%. As you can see, it's looking nice and speckled. We've got good textures there. Looks great. Okay, so for our next step, we are going to be painting in our veins for the leaves, just like we did for the orange ones. So create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to go ahead and change the blend mode to multiply. Go back to inking, select the technical pen brush, and again I've got a brush size of around 15%. Let's paint in the veins. That's too thick. Okay, 9%, 7%. I think 7% brush size is actually perfect for this. So with the same leaf brown color, same color that we made the leaves with, paint in the veins. And this one's easy because we don't have any smaller veins going off, it's just the central vein. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing that we did for the orange leaves as well. We'll be duplicating our stems layer and then reducing the opacity of the top layer down to 33%, and then selecting the lower duplicated layer and go ahead and apply a Gaussian blur. Again, we'll do about... Actually, I'm going to turn off our sketch layer because that's going to impede with this. Now apply a Gaussian blur, and let's have a look. How much do we need? For our leaves, we don't really need that much really, because it's already quite a thin vein in comparison to the orange ones. So I would suggest something around 3 to 4%. 3% is good. Okay, so that looks great. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to be painting in some darker gradients towards the bases. So let's create a clipping mask again and then change the blend mode to multiply. And we're going to go back to our soft airbrush in the brush library. We've still got the same leaf brown color. And then we can just increase our brush size to around 18% and then lightly paint in some gradient towards the base. Don't go beyond like half of the leaf, I would say just near the base. That works better. Okay, so once that's applied, go ahead and apply some Gaussian blur, very slightly, I'd say just about 3 or 4%. And once you're done with that, we're going to reduce the opacity of this layer to around 60%. Yeah, that looks nice. Next, we're going to go ahead and apply some highlights. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to screen. And we've still got the same color selected. Highlights are going to be near the tips or the edges, so wherever you want them. They're just bringing about some more nice depth to our leaves, some more color variations, as you can see. Okay, that's done. And then I'm going to apply a slight Gaussian blur again. Just about a 4%. And we're going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to 60% as well. Alright, and for our last clipping mask, we're going to go ahead and paint in some shadows. So once again, the blend mode will be multiply, and we're going to go back to our inking technical pen brush, and let's go ahead and paint in our object shadows. And this will help you identify where else you need your shadows, because I can see that I might need one in the orange section here. I'm gonna go ahead and apply some there. So keep working your way around. Alright, so we are done with the shadows on this one. I'm going to apply a very slight Gaussian blur to this, just about, I'd say, 2%. And then we're going to reduce the opacity again down to around 70%. And there we go, we have just completed our brown leaves as well, and I think that looks beautiful. So let's go ahead and group all of our brown leaves together and then rename the group as brown leaves. Nope, it's not leaves. Oh well, just type it in. Alright, we're going to be working on our yellow leaves next. So let's start with that. Create a new clipping mask. And yeah, we can keep the blend mode as normal. soft airbrush, and we're going to select the green color this time. We're going to be applying a green gradient. So I'm going to turn on our sketch layer again, and then just paint in some green gradient here in the center for our yellow leaves. You can see like we've got some nice color variations, but I've played around with the same kind of colors everywhere. So it's a mix and match, and that's something that you can adapt to your own color palettes as well later on, and try some nice combinations. Yeah, okay, so we're going to apply a Gaussian blur again, 7%. And then essentially it's the same thing again. We're going to be creating some textures. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to multiply for the base texture. We'll go back to charcoals and then select the willow charcoal this time. We've still got our green color selected. I've got a brush size of around 7%. And then we're just going to paint in very gently a texture here on our leaves. Okay, so just a gentle texture, we don't need to go overboard with this. But next we're going to create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode of this one to overlay. And we're going to return to our flicks brush in spray paints. We are now going to select the yellow color. Okay, in the first row, the yellow color in the first row. And then I've got a size of around 4% again. We're just going to, actually, I think we can increase the brush size to around 5% and then flick it. There you go. That looks nice. Gives us a bit more of a variation from the smaller flick texture that we've got going in all the other leaves. Lovely. So we don't really need to reduce the opacity for this. You can if you want, but I think I like how bright these spots are for these leaves, so that's fine. Again, we're going to go ahead and create our veins. So new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, go back to your technical pen brush, and then we're going to go ahead and select this leaf brown color that we had, the one right next to yellow. And then we're going to paint in the veins. Alright, that was quick. There are barely any veins in this one. Well, barely any leaves in general, if you might say. Okay, so we're repeating the same step. We're going to be duplicating this layer and then reduce the opacity of the top layer down to 33%. And the lower layer, we're going to go ahead and apply a Gaussian blur. So, yeah, I'd say around a 4% or so. I think that looks nice. Just wondering, perhaps it might look better if we use a different color, if we use the green color for our veins here. So I'm just going to go back to our top duplicated layer, turn on alpha lock, and then select the green color. And then go back to that layer, tap again, and in the menu, select fill layer. Let's see if that makes a difference at all. And then reduce it down to around 33% opacity. I think I like this a bit more than the stark brown thing that we had going on there. So we're going to repeat the same step for the duplicated layer as well. Turn on alpha lock, and then just fill layer. Yeah, this looks much nicer. So instead of having the leaf brown color, we'd gone back to a green color essentially. Yeah, that looks nice. Okay, so next we're going to be working on some shadows. So create a new clipping mask And then we're going to be changing the blend mode to multiply, and then we can start painting in all of our shadows wherever we've got the objects and everything. So let's start. We still got our green color selected this time. Paint in your shadows. So for the shadows, I would say whenever you draw them, just keep your canvas in this position. Don't try and turn it around and everything, because that will give you a false idea about where the shadows could lie. So it's better to just have the same position all over. And at this point, I would turn back our sketch layer, turn it on again, and as you can see, you'll be able to differentiate where exactly are the leaves themselves overlapping. So you can paint in this shadow as well. Okay, so those are all of the shadows really for this. We are going to go ahead and apply a soft Gaussian blur, just about a 2%. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity down to 70%. Looks so much more natural, doesn't it? As a shadow. Yeah, I like it. Alright, for our last step for the leaves section, we've got one more clipping mask. We're going to be applying some highlights. So turn on screen as the blend mode. And we are going back to our soft airbrush. Let's go ahead and select the yellow color for this. So we're painting our highlights again. Just around the tips. And I've noticed I haven't created a shadow for this. I will come back to that. Okay, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to 50%. And I'm going back to our shadow layer because I forgot to add in a bit of a shadow for this berry. Here we go. Everything counts, guys. Alright, so that looks lovely. We've got all of our leaves completed. Perfect. So we're going to group all of our yellow leaves groups together. Rename this group as yellow leaves. And the next task will be to work on our pumpkins. Okay, so let's start with adding a clipping mask to our pumpkins layer. We'll be painting in a little bit of an orange gradient. So select the orange color, and then we've still got our soft airbrush selected. We're just going to be painting in a slight gradient here near the stem bases. Just a slight one here around the edges, and then also a little bit near the lower sections of the pumpkins. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and apply a Gaussian blur. Just about, let's say, 7% or 8%. Yeah, I think 8% looks nice. So we've got some bit of a variation there in the gradient. I think that looks good. Okay, so next we're going to apply a general gradient for the pumpkins. So to do that, let's create a new clipping mask. And then we're going to go ahead and change the blend mode to multiply. And for our texture, we're going to be selecting the willow charcoal brush in charcoals. And then the color would be this cream color, which was the base. And let's go ahead and just paint in the general texture to the pumpkins, and we're going to reduce the opacity down to 50%. Okay, and we're going to create a new clipping mask now. Change the blend mode to multiply again, and we're still going to be in the charcoal section, but this time select the 2B compressed brush for this. We're going to be painting in a little bit more of a texture, but we're going to be using this 2B compressed brush as shadow texture. Alright, let's select the orange color for this, and I've got a brush size of around 3%, which will work for this. Now we're just going to be painting in shadows, shadow textures just around the lower edges. Now as you can see, I am not adding a texture completely around all of this. I'm trying to follow these lines and making a C shape like that. A little bit of a C shape or a curved L, whatever you want to call it. So that's going to help us give a nice texture variation as well. And as a last step, probably we're going to be adding in a similar kind of a texture, but as a highlight. So that's going to enhance the effect of this pumpkin having a nice grainy texture too. So that's another trick that you guys can use for your own illustrations, that you can actually use these texture brushes as effects to enhance your shadows and highlights. Okay, I think that looks good. Alright, so we're going to reduce the opacity of this, however, down to around 50%. Doesn't need to be too dark. So just enough that you are able to see it, but it's not overpowering. Okay, next we're going to be adding in some more, let's say, actual shadows to these pumpkins. So let's go ahead and do that. Create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and this time we're going to select the technical pen brush again in inking, go back to this cream color, and then we're going to be painting in some shadows like I mentioned, but they're going to be a bit more defined. So something like this. Now just try and maintain your shadows within these curved lines. Fill that in, for example. And then we're going to make a new one just like that. Alright, so we've got all of our shadows here, so just pause the video here if you want to just have a look at where we're placing our shadows, and then we're going to blend these in. Alright, so for blending we are going back to our soft airbrush, and now what we need to do is we need to make sure that the edges which are curving inside, as you can see here, this is curving in and then it's curving out again. The inside need to stay as they are. We don't need to interfere with them at all, but the outsides are the ones that need to be blended in. So that will give us a nice strong outline towards the center, but it's going to be a bit more blended in towards the outside, and that's what's going to create this nice effect for us. And this is why we're not using the Gaussian blur function for this, because Gaussian blur will just blur everything uniformly, even these edges that we want to be a bit crisper. So we're not going to use that. Alright, so I think that looks so nice and soft, doesn't it? So if we turn off our sketch layer here, you can see what I meant. You can actually see the edges where the pumpkins are going, the pumpkin edges are curving in a bit. So that's exactly what we wanted. I'm just going to lightly, very lightly, just blend these in slightly so that it's not pixelated at least, but they look gentle and nice. You'll have to be very, very gentle with the brush strokes at this point because we still want the outlines to be visible. Alright, I think that looks lovely. Nice. So next what we're going to do is we're going to be just reducing the opacity of this layer down to around 40% because it's a bit too dark. We'll be building upon the shadows, so don't worry about it. But we're going to create a new clipping mask now. And then we're going to change the blend mode to add this time and create some highlights. Alright, so we've still got the same cream color selected. I'm going to turn our sketch layer back on. And then this time, let's go ahead and select the soft airbrush. So again, I'm just going to be painting in some highlights around the areas which are not covered by our shadows. So just some of them. The pumpkins are not going to be very reflective, so this is quite bright as you can see, but we'll be doing a lot of blending and reducing the opacity of this layer, so don't worry about that. Okay, and now I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 15%. There you go, that's already looking so much better, doesn't it? So yeah, so I'm just going to pause the video here. I mean, you can pause the video here if you want to have a look as to where I've placed the highlights, and then we can continue. Okay, so for this one, I think we can just apply a Gaussian blur, just about 3%, 3% or 4%. Yeah, I think 3% looks nice, so we can just leave it at that. So the next thing we're going to be working on would be adding in some more shadows and some more highlights. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're going to create one more clipping mask. Change the blend mode to multiply. We're enhancing the shadows here. So let's select this light brown color below the red color, and I think we've still got our soft airbrush selected. We're just going to enhance these lower shadows a bit more. And then we can add a little bit in the center as well. Just like that. Let's do the same here. So as you can see, I'm still following the pattern of creating something like that, you know, like curves, so that it gives a nice contour to our pumpkin's ear, rather than just having straight shadows, which just would not look nice and will not give us the effect that we want. Something in the center as well. Alright, let's reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 50%. And then we're going to apply a Gaussian blur as well. Just about 4%. Yeah, 4% Gaussian blur, and as you can see, it's looking pretty nice already. I'm just going to use the soft airbrush as the smudge tool to slightly blend these in a bit more. Follow the shape a bit more. Okay, so that looks nice. Now we're going to be adding in some more of these shadows near the curves to enhance them a bit more. So if we just actually turn off the sketch layer, and as you can see that they are curved, but they're not exactly that prominent yet. So we're going to reduce the sketch opacity quite a bit, and now we're going to create a new clipping mask to our pumpkin's layer, and then change the blend mode to multiply, and we will go back to our technical pen brush this time and select this cream color. Now let's go ahead and paint in our shadows here. And as you can see, in some of these sections I am creating shadows on other sides, not always on one side of the sketch, depending on where our light source would be falling and where our shadows would be. So always keep in mind where the light source is. Alright, so you've got something like this. I'm also going to enhance the shadows a little bit here at the edge, just so that they're curving in and we get the effect. A bit more. I think that looks nice. You can also just differentiate both of these pumpkins. Alright, so once you've got something like this, I'm just going to hold the screen here for you. You can pause it and have a look. And once we're done with that, now we can go ahead and use the same aspect of blending as we did for our initial shadow layer, that we're just going to be blending in the outsides. So that the inner curved edge remains quite crisp. Okay, so here we go. That's looking so much better already. Very nice. Now you can just gently blend in the crisp edges so that they don't look so stark. All right, I've got this. And then I'm just going to add in a bit more of a shadow here for the center. Alright, so we're done adding in these and I think that looks lovely. Now we're going to be duplicating this layer. So let's go ahead and duplicate this, but we're going to change the blend mode of the top layer to color burn. That's already looking so nice and colorful, but we're going to reduce the opacity of this down to 60%. And there you go, that's looking beautiful. Just going to blend this out now so that it doesn't look so bright and orange. Okay, I'm also going to go back to the original, like the second duplicated layer, the original layer that we duplicated. I'm just going to enhance the blending for that too. Alright, so that looks great. Next we're going to be adding in some more, you know, like how it's all orangish right now. Let's try and add a bit more of a color here. So we're going to create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode to linear burn this time. And then go back to the technical pen brush, and we're going to be using the green color this time, okay? And this is where we're going to add some proper shadows for our pumpkin. So there you go. I'm painting in something like this. Okay, so we've got all of our shadows in place. We're now going to just reduce the opacity of this layer down to 40%. And then we are going to just blend these again. Alright, so I think that looks nice. There's more shape to our pumpkins. They look more realistic. Looks great. Okay, so we are now going to just add the last bit here for our pumpkins. And as you can see, I think we can, hold off, just add a little bit more here. I think we need some more shadows for these acorns. Shadows are very important, guys. I know they're hard work, but once those are added, they just give such a beautiful effect to the work. So yeah. And for the last step, for our pumpkins themselves, we're going to create one more clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode to add. Go back to our charcoal section and select the 2B compressed brush. Select your orange color. And like I mentioned before that we'd added some texture to our shadows, we're going to add in a little highlight on the opposite ends. You can see we've got a nice textured highlight going on around here, and that's exactly what we need. So let's go ahead and paint in these right around here. Alright, so that looks lovely, and we are done with the pumpkin section here. Next we're going to be working on our stems. So I'm going to increase the opacity of the sketch layer, and then before we go ahead, let's just group all of our pumpkins layers together, and then we're going to just rename this group as pumpkin base. Right, now select your stems layer, and then we're going to create a clipping mask for that. We're going to be painting in some texture first for this, so we will go back to our 2B compressed brush in charcoals for this, and then select the green color, paint in some texture. Oh, we need to change the blend mode. Change the blend mode to multiply, and then paint in slight texture. And then we're going to just reduce the opacity of this down to about 70%. Don't need there to be a lot of texture here, so whatever we've got is just fine. Alright, Next we're going to add in some shadows for this. So create a clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then we're going to go back to our technical pen brush in inking. Whoops. Technical pen brush in inking. And then let's apply some shadows. So we know that we're going to have some shadow here from the stem curving onto these sepals here. So that's that. And then we're going to be painting in shadows. Maybe just have a little bit here as well, curving in around the base. And then we can do the same for this as well. So we're just trying to differentiate the objects from each other with the help of shadows and highlights, which is why we're paying so much attention to these in my illustrations. That really, helps to get rid of line art as such. There's nothing wrong with line art. I really like line art in illustrations, but my illustrations usually tend to go towards the more realistic side, and I don't really like using line art in my work too much. So yeah, that you can work around that with a lot of concentration on shadows and highlights. Okay, so now we're going to use the soft airbrush as the smudge tool. And hold on, I just want to add a bit more of a shadow here for the stem itself. And now we're going to go ahead and just blend in the outer surfaces of all of these shadows. Alright, so those shadows are done. I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this layer now down to 80%. And we're creating one last clipping mask for the pumpkins, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to color dodge to add in our highlights. We've still got our technical pen brush selected for sharper control. And then you can add in your highlights in the opposite areas of your shadows. And then blend it in. Alright, we're going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 75%. And there you go. So we've just completed all of our pumpkins, and I think they look very cute. Alright, so let's go ahead and just group our pumpkin stems layers together as well. Rename this group as pumpkin stems. Great. Okay, so next we're going to be working on the pine cones. So let's go ahead and select our pine cones layer right here. Now we're going to be just creating a new clipping mask for these. And we are going to be painting in the lighter edges that you see here. So as you know, pine cones have these edges right around here, so they will be a little lighter. So we're going to be working on those first. So let's select this lighter brown color in the second row, and we still got our technical pen brush selected. Be painting in these lighter edges and filling them in. So I'm just going to speed up the video here, and I will see you once all of these are done on all 3 pine cones. Okay, so we've got all of these edges painted in, and that looks great. Next we're going to be creating a texture for these, so create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to color burn. So we are still using the same lighter color. We're going to go back to charcoals and select the willow charcoal this time and just paint in a light texture because it's a bit too dark. We'll reduce the opacity in a bit. Yeah, and then reduce the opacity of this down to about 70%. Okay, so we've got a nice grainy, woody kind of a texture already to this pine cone. And now we're going to be painting in some depth shadows, basically. So let's go ahead and do that. Create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then we're going to go and select, let's say the technical pen brush for this. Now we will select our base brown color for the pine cones, which was this third color in the second row. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to just increase the opacity. And we are now going to be painting in these shadows. So you know that these pine cones have depths in here. So it's basically like we need to just delineate each of these here. One thing that I would do is also just select this edge layer that we have, select that and tap on invert, okay, and then go back to this new layer that you've created where you're painting in the depth shadows, because that'll just help you in steering clear of the edges, which are meant to be lighter anyway. So as you can see, I'm trying to have a longer shadow for the ones that are situated below the ones that are on the top. Just like that. Okay, let's just paint all of these depths in first and then we'll get around to blending them in. Alright, so now you've got your soft airbrush as the smudge tool, and now we're just going to go ahead and blend in the edges so that they look a bit more natural. I'm going to also reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 80% so that it doesn't look so dark. So the areas that we need to blend are the ones that are going on to each, I'm just going to call them leaves. I don't know what they are, what's their technical term for them, but each leaf of the pine cone, you just need to blend in the shadows for those. So if you remove the selection, you'll be able to see it looks so much nicer now, doesn't it? It's got a lot of depth and you're able to distinguish all of these leaves from each other. So we're going to go back and just reselect this, tap on invert, and then we're going to continue blending. Okay, so we've got all of our depth shadows ready to go, and then what we need to do is add in some highlights to the top areas again, just to make them a little bit different from the rest of the edges as such. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to reselect our edges layer and then tap on invert again. It's basically the same thing that we've been doing so far, and then go back and create a new clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to screen, and then we're just going to get started with the painting with a technical pen brush. Okay, so we've still got our technical pen brush selected, and here's what we're going to do. So we're just going to be painting in some of these individual leaves. And then we're going to try and blend this in once these are done. And looks like I haven't filled those in. That's fine, I'll do it in a minute. Okay, and now we're going to just reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 80%. And there we go. If we just remove the selection tool, you can see it's looking so much nicer now. We've got a nice kind of depth variation here as well. And yeah, so that's what we're going to do. Let's do the same for the other two as well. And yeah, I've just turned on my selection again. And we're going to work around the others. Okay, so we've got all of these edges and everything sorted now, so I think that looks great. Next thing that we're going to be working on would be to just add in some shadows to the edges themselves. So it's time to, I think I'm just going to rename this edge layer because it's a bit confusing to locate it, but this is our edge layer and we're just going to select that. And then now we're going to create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then we're going to have the same edge color selected, and we can go back to our soft airbrush this time. Now what we're going to do is just paint in some shadows to the individual edges. So they're going to be on the lower surface of all of the edges, as you can see. So again, just make sure that you keep your wreath in this position, because that'll really help you to figure out where exactly do you need to place in your shadows. Otherwise you'll be placing in shadows everywhere, and then that just would not look good. If we turn that off, you can see it's looking nice already. We've got a lot of depth and shadow and just variation here, so it gives it a nice 3D kind of an effect. Exactly what we're going for. So I'm just going to go ahead and blend the remaining ones too. Okay, so that's that. And the next thing that we're going to be working on would be adding in some more highlights around the edges themselves. But for now, let's just reduce the opacity of this edge shadow layer to about 75%. And then we're going to create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode of this one to screen. And we are going to use the dry ink brush this time in inking. So if we go down to dry ink here, we'll use that. And we've still got the edge color here selected. I've got a brush size of around 3%. And what we're going to do is we're just going to be painting in the edges. So let's go ahead and paint in our highlights, just like these around the edges. Now, we're not selecting the edge layer for this because it's going to give us a nice boundary between the lighter edge here and the edge color anyway. The main surface and the edge, I mean. So that's kind of nice. And then you can use this brush to give you some more definition on some of these individual leaves too. Don't need to go overboard with them, but just add a little bit and that'll help. Okay, and to see what it'll really look like, we're going to reduce the opacity of this down to 30% so that it's not so bright. But if we remove the sketch, voila, there you go. It's got a nice subtle effect of adding in some highlights because this is wood. Wood is originally not very reflective. We just need enough to be able to give us some differentiation between the lines. So we're going to keep the sketch layer off and just continue working on adding in these highlights as we go. Okay, so we've added in all of our edge highlights as well, and I think that looks great. Now for the last step for our pine cones, we just need to add in a few more shadows just to give it a nicer overall look. So we're creating a new clipping mask and changing the blend mode of this one to multiply, and then we're going back to the soft air brush, and we can then go back to our pines color, the base that we had, and then just go ahead and add in some more shadows, especially in the areas where some of these are darker. As you can see, we're just enhancing the darkness in some of these areas, and where we've got some overlap between two individual leaves here for the pine cones. And then you can go ahead and blend that in as well. Alright, so the pine cones are ready. Yay! I think they look lovely, and well done on keeping up. Okay, so let's just group our pine cone layers together and then rename this as pine cones. Brilliant. So the next thing we're going to be working on would be the acorns. So let's locate our acorns here. So we've got acorn bases, and then we've got our acorn tops. So I'm going to turn on our sketch layer, reduce the opacity again. We're going to start off with the acorn bases. So we're going to create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode of that to multiply, and we'll add a base texture first. So for the texture, let's go to textures and then select the Karawang brush, and we are going to just select the base color of the acorn, which was this nice rich saturated reddish brown color. And then all we're going to do is, I've got a brush size of around 36% and its opacity is 75%. Just paint in some nice texture to it. It will be very faint, but it will be there. And that's all that we really want, for it to just be there rather than overpower. Yeah, okay, so once that is done, next we'll be adding in some shadows around the edges to give it a more curved kind of a look. So create a new clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to multiply, and then we're going to go ahead and select the soft air brush. We've still got the same color selected. We are now going to be painting in shadows around the edges. Just like that. Okay, so these are all created. We are now going to apply a Gaussian blur to these. So I would say just about a 4% Gaussian blur. So that already gives us a nice kind of a rounded effect on this, and that's great. Okay, so we're going to create one more clipping mask on top of this. Change the blend mode to multiply again, and we're going to go back to our technical pen brush in inking. Now our purpose now is to just make in these lines that you see here, just about here. So we'll be painting in those. So I'm going to reduce the brush size down to about 7%, and these will be very faint once we're actually done with them, but it just adds an extra dimension of shape to these acorns. Okay, so once you've painted those in, I'm just going to reduce the opacity of the sketch layer again. Now we're just going to apply a blur again to these, and that can be up to about 3%. And there you go. It's very faint, but it's there, as you can see. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is apply some highlights. So let's do that. We'll create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to screen, and then we're going to go back to the soft airbrush in airbrushing, and let's paint in some of our highlights. So the highlights are going to help in trying to make this shape, this rounded kind of a shape, come out. So just see where you're going to place them. They'll look nice, like these little triangles almost, according to where they're placed, remember. Okay, so once these are done, we can then go ahead and just apply some Gaussian blur. So you can just pause the screen here and have a look, see where we are placing our highlights. Alright, once that's done, let's apply some Gaussian blur, and I would go down to about 5% or maybe 6%. 6% looks nice for this. It's got a nice tinge and everything. I've got a good idea of how it's looking. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, so now we're just going to add another layer of highlights because this is very subtle and our acorns are supposed to be really shiny. So one more layer, change the blend mode of this one to add, this clipping mask to add, and then we're going to place some spot highlights almost. So this is what it's going to look like. So these are going to be more like just straight lines, or as in curved lines, rather than the triangles that we'd be making. Except a few, if you want. Alright, so once that's done, again, we're going to be applying a Gaussian blur. to this, and you can see it's all looking nice and shiny now already. So we want about a 5% Gaussian blur on this, and then you can reduce the opacity of this down to about 90%. And you can individually just blend in a few if you want. I think the ones here would look nicer if they were blended in a bit. Yeah, I think that looks good. So we'll be adding just one more layer of highlights for these acorn bases. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to add again. And we've still got the same base color selected. We're going to be painting just little spots now to these. Just where our previous highlights were. And then reduce the opacity of this layer down to about 40%. And now you can apply a very slight Gaussian blur, again just about 4 or 5%. And there you go, you've got some very nice shiny, nice looking acorns here. They look very good, but I think we might be able to just change the color of this because this seems a little bit too reddish to me. Maybe we can try a different color? Not too sure, but let's have a look. So if we turn on alpha lock and then perhaps use this acorn top color and fill that in, does that look better? Probably not, too shiny. I think those look okay, maybe. Let's see what else we can do. How about white? Does that look better with white? So 40%. Yeah, I think it looks better with white. Definitely. Maybe we can blur this up slightly, a bit more. Oh, remove the alpha lock first. Yeah, just about 2%. Okay, so that looks great. I've just changed the last highlight layer that we had to white, and I did that by just turning on alpha lock, selecting the white color, and then tapping on this again and selecting fill layer. So that's how you got the white color. Okay, you can turn off your alpha lock, and now we're just going to add in a little bit more of a shadow. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to multiply, and these are going to be the shadows for all the objects that are on top of these acorn bases. So select the acorn base color again, which was the rich brown color that we had. We're painting in our object shadows. There's not much really on these acorns, so that's fine. Okay, so those are done, and then we can just apply some Gaussian blur to this, just about 2%, and there you go, you've added all of your shadows as well. We don't really need to enhance them too much, I suppose, or maybe, I'm just wondering, if we undo the Gaussian blur, and then maybe just enhance the shadows a little bit more on the edges so that they look a little bit more curved. I wonder if that's going to look nice too. So I'm just adding some quick edge shadows only, just around the edges to to the same one, same layer I mean. Okay, and then we can apply some Gaussian blur again to this, just about the 2%, and then roughly just blend in these edge ones. I think that makes it look really nice and rounded. Alright, so these are done and I think they look great. So next thing that we're going to be working on would be the acorn tops. So we are done with our acorn bases. Let's go ahead and group our acorn bases together first. And then rename this group as acorn bases. Now these are our acorn tops here on layer 11. We're now going to create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode to multiply and apply a texture. So the texture for this one can be in charcoals, the 2B compressed brush, and we are going to select the same color as the acorn top, and then just place in a nice texture for all of these. So if you've ever seen an acorn top, it's very rough and it's lots of dots on top of them. We probably would not be able to go into too much detail on it in this one because this tutorial will never end otherwise. But we'll try and get an effect similar to that. So this will help in a way. And now we're just going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to around 60%. And let's have a look. Yeah, so you've got some spotty kind of a texture here. That's great. Okay, so next we're going to be working with the shadows again. So let's create a new clipping mask. Change the blend mode to multiply, and we're going to bring back our sketch layer. Go back to the airbrush, the soft airbrush. We've still got the same color selected. Now, as you can see, we've got shadows on both sides. We've got the edge shadows, and then we have a line here as well, like that. So just add in both of them. I've got a brush size of around 2%. And that helps, just like that. Okay, so once you've painted in these lines as shadows and everything, we are then just going to apply a Gaussian blur to this. Just about 3% or so, not much, just 3%. Yeah, and then we're going to go ahead and apply some of our texture, the same texture, but as a highlight. So create a new clipping mask, and then change the blend mode this time to screen, and we are going back to our charcoal brush, the 2B compressed brush, and just slightly rotate the canvas a bit, and then go ahead and apply your speckled kind of a texture. As you can see, this is definitely giving us that effect without having to draw those individual spots. So you've still got the same color selected as the acorn top. And there we go, we've got nice speckled, like pointed kind of texture here. That looks great. Reduce the opacity down to 80%. And now we're just going to work on some more of these shadows. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to multiply. And let's go back to our soft airbrush again. I'm going to be painting in some more shadows. Because it's looking a bit too simple and not even simple, I'd say flat. Flat is the right word for it. Right, blur it up. So again, we'll go down to around 3% in this, and that looks good. So we'll be adding some more highlights to these now. So you can turn off our sketch layer, add in some highlights, so create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode to screen. And then we have the same acorn top color selected. Just go ahead and paint in your highlights. That's a bit too much. And we'll be adding one more shadow layer just so that we can differentiate the overlapping objects. Okay, apply a Gaussian blur again to this. Go down to about 3 to 4%, just touching 4%. And now it's time for the final ones. Clipping mask again, and then change the blend mode to multiply. And we are going to be painting in the shadows for the overlying objects now, on top of these acorns. There we go. You can see how everything's coming along well now. Alright, let's bring back our sketch layer just so that we can see where we need to place in our shadows. Here we go. Alright, so once that's done, again we're just applying a minimum amount of Gaussian blur, just about 2%. And there you go, we've added all of our highlights and shadows for our acorns as well, and they are ready. They look very spectacularly shiny. I love it. Alright, so let's just group our acorn tops together and name this group as Acorn Tops. Lovely. So acorns are ready. The next thing that we're going to be working on would be the berries. So let's select our yellow berries layer, create a new clipping mask for this, change the blend mode to multiply, and then we're going to add textures to these first. So we can go back to our charcoals, select the 2B compressed brush for this, and we will select our yellow color. Just go ahead and add in some nice grainy texture to these berries. And then we'll reduce the opacity down to around 85% so that it's not, there is a texture, but it's not overpowering. Okay, next we create another clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to multiply, and then we'll be adding in our shadows. So go back to your soft airbrush, you've got the same yellow color selected, you can increase your brush size to around 5% or so. And we want all of our shadows to be on the lower side, so make these little curve shadows just like this. Again, just make sure that your wreath is in the perfect position like this, like just vertical and not twisted at an angle, because that will mess up your shadow placements. And yeah, so once you've done something like this, we are then going to apply a Gaussian blur. Let's say you can blur it around 4 to 5%. 4%, just touching 5, I suppose. Yeah, that looks nice. Anything that you want to blend, you can blend it too, but I think that looks good enough. So next we're going to apply some highlights, create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to screen. With the same yellow color, we're going to be applying some highlights, and these will be on the opposite sides. Of the shadows, I mean, opposite side of the shadows. It was all implied. I hope you understood. Okay, let's apply a Gaussian blur to this too. Go down to around 4%. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, so I think we really do not need to add in some more highlights at the moment. We will add some right at the end, but they can be all collective, even for the red berries. So for now, this seems fine. I'm just going to turn off the sketch layer so we can have a look. Yeah, they're looking pretty nice. Maybe just enhance these shadows a bit more, just for this one here, so that we know exactly where the second berry ends, just like that. Perfect. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be working on would be the red berries. We're done with the yellow ones. We can group our yellow berries together. rename this group as yellow berries, and we're going to repeat the same steps for the red ones too. Create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then go back to charcoals, select the 2B compressed brush, and with the red color, paint in your texture. Alright, so once that's done, we can then go ahead and apply some shadows to this as well. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then go back to your soft airbrush and then start painting in your shadows. You've still got the red color selected for this. Okay, and then we're going to apply a Gaussian blur. Once again, just about 3% because these berries are much smaller. And they look good. Okay, some of these might need a little bit more definition, the ones that are overlapping. And that looks good. Now we're going to apply our highlights for these. So create a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to color dodge. And let's place our highlights. It also helps to just add your highlights in slightly different positions. To avoid it all being generically in just one position. Okay, apply a Gaussian blur again to this. And this one can be just about 3%. And there you go, we've done our berries. I know that some of them are still being overlapped by objects, but we will handle all of those on one separate layer a little later. So let's go ahead and just group our red berries together. Rename this group as red berries, and that looks great. Okay, so for the next thing, let's add in our background color because we're going to be working on the main twigs here, and that'll probably be one of the last parts of our illustration. Don't worry guys, you're doing great. Just keep going, we're almost there. Alright, so we're going to be changing in our background color, so tap on background and select this first really dark color, and there you go. We've just changed our background and it looks splendid. Look at that, how beautiful. Don't you feel like that sometimes colors just change the way they look depending on what colors surround them? This is exactly the same situation. It looked so different when it was white, but it's looking really nice and the colors are looking beautiful against it. Alright, so the next thing we're going to be working on would be the twigs. So for the first part, for the twigs, we are going to just create a clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode of this one to color. So color is a nice way of adding in some extra hues while the hue is preserved. As a blending mode, however, it still kind of interacts a little bit with the color below it, which does not happen with a layer that is on normal. So we're just going to select the green color here to add in a bit more of a greenish texture, greenish color I mean, and then just paint in a slight green color variation here and there on the twigs. Well, you can see the difference. If I put it as a color, it's interacting with the brown one, but if I put it back as a normal, it gives a different color combination, doesn't it? So that's what we want to achieve. Bring it down to color again, and now we're just going to apply a Gaussian blur. So you can go ahead and blur it up quite a bit, actually, down to about 30%. We don't want it to be very green, we just want it to be a slight greenish tinge. Okay, so that's what we've achieved with that. It's barely visible, but the effect is nice. So turn on your sketch layer again, and now we're going to be adding in some depth to our twigs here. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and then select your technical pen brush, and then we're going to select the twigs color, which was the second brown color in the first row. And what we're going to do now is basically just enhance the shadows in a way. So as you can see, we've got layers here, we've got twigs here which have definite shapes, and then the spaces between them which need to be colored in. So that's just going to give us an effect that, you know, there is more depth to it, there are more twigs and shapes in there. So let's just go ahead and paint those in, just like these, and we'll be filling them in too. And because they are twigs and not exactly very rounded twigs as such, make sure that when you change the direction, you're changing it at an angle, and it's not rounded, it's more at an angle. Okay, for all of your twigs. So if you've got something like these, just fill in your shapes like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the opacity of this layer down to around just 30%, because we'll be building upon this a little bit. So all of these shapes, let's just fill those in. I think what we can also do is just make these two separate. For some reason they were meant to be separate, but there's supposed to be a gap in there. I didn't notice that it had been filled in, so I'm just using the eraser tool to just erase this gap. between these two twigs. Okay, so that's the gap that I meant. It would be nice if we had that, and now we do. So we're going to go back to our brown color that we had, and let's just go ahead and continue with this, adding in these big spaces and filling them in. Yeah, so just go ahead and fill in the shapes wherever you want, really. There's no fixed rule. All we just need is to have a bit more of a difference in color. So yeah, help yourself. Alright, so now that we've added in all of these colors here, that looks great. We're now going to be working on just these. So we're going to select this layer, and then we're going to create a new clipping mask, and then change the blend mode of this to multiply, and then go back to soft airbrush in airbrushing. We're going to now just paint in some more shadows just to these areas. So let's go ahead and paint in shadows on the lower surface of these gaps. So you can see that this is going to help us give the effect of so much more depth. Alright, so once you've painted these in, we are then going to just reduce the opacity down to around 70%. And then let's apply a Gaussian blur. Let's say about a 5% Gaussian blur. And that looks pretty good. We're then just going to duplicate this layer. And let's have a look. That looks nice. Yeah, we've got so much more depth already in this. Looks great. So the lower layer here that we duplicated, we can just apply another Gaussian blur to this, just about 2% more. And as you can see, we've barely done much to this, but we've already had so much more depth, and that is exactly what we wanted. So that looks great. Yeah, I think we can increase the opacity of the top layer to about 75%, and that's great. So next thing that we're going to do is add in some shadows and highlights to the rest of the twigs themselves. So let's start by adding in some highlights. So you're going to turn on a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to screen, and this time let's also select our main layer that we had here, the ones that had all the gaps, this layer. We can then go ahead and just select it, tap on invert so that only these individual twigs layer is now visible. Right, so go on to your screen layer and we'll be painting in all of our highlights on these individual twigs. So these will have to be on the top surface because all of our shadows are going to be on the lower layer. So go ahead and paint in all of your highlights for these individual twigs on the top surface. Alright, so once you've got all of your highlights in, it's time to just go ahead and blend these in. But I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this slightly down to around 90%. And then we can just blend it in slightly. Let's say, don't need more than about 2 to 3% maybe. Yeah, 2%. Okay, so that looks pretty nice. Okay, so it's time to add in your shadows now. We still haven't removed the selections. So just below the screen layer, we're going to create a new clipping mask. Change that to multiply. And then let's go ahead and paint in shadows on the opposite edges. Alright, so we've got all of our shadows here as well for the individual twigs. Let's go ahead and just reduce the opacity of this one down to around 80%. And then we can apply a Gaussian blur here as well, just about 3%. And let's have a look. Turn off the sketch layer. And these look pretty nice. Yeah, we've got a very twiggy wreath here. I think it looks very, very nice. There are some of these edges which I would like to clean up. So let's do that then. We're going to go back to our screen layer here, and I'm just going to clean this up slightly, just so that, you know, they look yeah, so that they look a bit part of this, like they're actual twigs. So yeah, all I'm doing is I'm just erasing these ends here. I think that looks nice. We don't really need to go overboard with this, but this is a very twiggy kind of a wreath, and that was the aim and we've achieved it. Well done. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is just adding in some more of a texture here to these twigs, because right now they look pretty airbrushed. So let's do that then. We are going back to our color layer here and creating a clipping mask above it. So once we've done that, change the blend mode to linear burn, and we are going to select in charcoals the burnt tree brush, and I've got a maximum size there. Just go ahead and place in this texture, and then we can reduce the opacity of this layer down to just about 10%. Because honestly, you don't need a lot of texture, you just need a bit. And that has already given it such a nice look over here. Alright, so we are done with this almost. We just need to add in a few shadows of the objects on the twigs too. So we're going to create a new layer on new clipping mask right on top of all of our clipping masks for the twigs. Change the blend mode to multiply, and then let's go back to the soft airbrush. Actually, let's go back to the technical pen brush. We've still got our brown color selected, and let's go ahead and paint in all of our shadows here for the leaves and all the objects that we have here. Remember, everything is going to cast a shadow, so even these stems, so don't forget them. It's a bit difficult to remember what exactly, so just go object by object and keep on adding shadows for those. Alright, so once you've added in all of your shadows, we are then just going to apply a slight Gaussian blur as we've done for all of the shadow objects so far, just about a 2%. And then we're going to slightly reduce the opacity down to 90%. And there you go, you can see that it looks very nice, natural shadows. And yeah, so we are almost done with this. We're just going to add a little bit more magic to our illustration. But as a last step, like you've seen over here, we just need to sort of differentiate these berries and add a bit more of shadows of the objects on the berries as well on this. So let's go ahead and do that in a second. We're going to group our twigs layers together and just rename this group as twigs. And we can go right to the top and create a new layer for this basically. So for that, we can change the blend mode to multiply. And let's select the orange color for this. So we want to just add on some extra shadows here that you can see basically. You've got some shadows here. So I would just want a bit more depth to these berries as such. So any other objects? I don't think so. Not on there. We've got that. Okay, and do we need these anywhere else? Maybe just enhance these a bit more. Yeah. And then let's just go ahead and blur it all up. I'd say about 4%. They're looking so much fuller now. Nice. Just going to blend in these shadows that we made for the pumpkins a bit more. And let's see, I think the object shadows just need to be placed in a bit. Maybe for those we can use one of the brown colors. And then just use your smudge tool to slightly blend in that shadow. That looks better than the orange shadow, definitely. Yep. Anything else? Do we have shadows anywhere else? Any overlapping objects? Here we go. So can do the same for these on the berries, the red ones. Alright, so I think we are done with all of these details. That looks great. So now it's time to just add on a little bit more of a specular highlight. Like I mentioned, we'll make our berries tiny bit shinier. So for that, just creating a new layer, tap on add as the blend mode, and then use the soft airbrush with the white color this time. Just create a little bit of a spot here like that for all of your berries. Alright, so once that is done, go ahead and apply a Gaussian blur, and we can apply the blur to about 5%, and then some of these I will just blend in a bit more, especially the ones on the bigger berries. I want them shiny, but I don't want them excessively shiny. And yeah, so just adding that little specular highlight makes such a difference. As you can see, if we remove them it looks a bit flat, but by adding them there's suddenly so much more depth to it. Oh, and I'm running on low battery again. That's fine, we're almost done anyway. So that's that. Next we are just going to bring in some magic, like I said. So let's go down to the Twigs layer, Twigs group I mean, duplicate the base Twigs group, and then we're going to just change the blend mode of this one to add, and then we are going to go ahead and reduce the opacity of that to around 80%, the add layer, and then apply a Gaussian blur. And you can see that the whole thing has started to glow. Yay! So we want a glow of about, let's say, 25%. I think that looks nice. Alright, so for the last couple of steps actually, we're just going to create a nice magical swirl around it. So that will be like a magical dust. And to do that, we are going to go right to the top, create a new layer, change the blend mode of that layer to add, and then in luminance, go ahead and select the glimmer brush. Duplicate this glimmer brush, tap on the duplicated one, and go to spacing in stroke path, just increase it to maximum. Alright, so you've got a nice glimmer brush which will basically just allow a lot more spacing between all of your like all these magical dots that you have in the glimmer brush. So yeah. So now I've got a brush size of around 13%. You can definitely have a smaller one or a bigger one as you wish, but what we're going to do is we're going to create something like this. Okay, so I think I will go down to about 12% and just have some nice kind of a curve there. You can do it a bit more actually. Reduce your brush size to around 9%. And then what we're trying to achieve is a bit more of an effect where it seems like it's overlapping and going all around it, just like that. So yeah, just something like that, and that's also looking very magical and nice. You can fill in some of these if you want. Okay, and then we're going to create one more layer, change the blend mode to add, and we'll be painting in some fireflies in this. So for that we need the light pen brush in luminance. I've got a brush size of around 12% for this, and all we just need to do is paint in some random fireflies with the same orange color. So yeah, help yourself wherever you want. You can place in these pretty little fireflies amongst the same part. That's just going to make it look even more magical. It's like this swirl is basically a path for the fireflies in a way. Okay, so that looks very nice. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate this layer, all right? And then the lower layer, we're just going to reduce the opacity down to about 80%. And then we're going to apply a Gaussian blur to this so that it looks a bit more blurry and nice. So we'll go down to about 9%. Very good. And the top layer, we can also reduce the opacity of that to about 80%. And there you go. You have just created this beautiful, magical autumn wreath, as you can see. Got lovely details all around. Stunning. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial, guys. You've done so well. It's a really long tutorial, lots of things to cover in this, but it's just very pretty to look at the end. So thank you so much for joining me. So guys, if you'd like to share your creation with me online, remember to tag me in your post on Instagram. I absolutely love seeing your versions of the tutorials and sharing them on my page. And make sure to subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this tutorial too. And don't forget to check out my other videos. I've got so many more magical projects waiting for you. New tutorials come out every 2 weeks on my channel, so hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.